Hello, once again, everybody. This is Heather. I am a certified nutritional therapist with Essential Wellness Northwest, and of course, Mom Dakili. In case you missed it, I was by myself live for a good solid 10 to 12 minutes because we had a technical issue and had no idea I was on camera. Oh my God! Like, there's a lot to learn about being technical, and obviously, I am not technical, so. Deanna and I have been losing our SHIT, laughing so hard, making complete asses out of our the theme for the week. But we are here and we still have invaluable information to offer you. So you didn't know you were in for a comedy show earlier, but now we will get down to business. Right, Deanna?
Yes. We're going to try if we can stop the giggles.
Totally. I mean, literally, our eyes were pouring and streaming. But if you missed it, maybe sneak a peek before I take it off. I hear it was pretty entertaining. I haven't had a chance to watch.
Yes, and she wasn't laughing by herself. I was there too. You just couldn't see me. So anyway, I am Deanna Wilcox, and I'm a certified health coach of Thriving with Deanna. And I'm located in Vermont and mom to two amazing boys. And we are psyched to be here tonight. And if we didn't have energy before, we absolutely do now. So really, though, prior to even our first go with this, Heather and I were talking about how very grateful we feel to share this information with you. And we really want to smooth the bumps in the road for you guys as you might be taking this journey or someone that you love. And so we just ask that you like this video and share it, not the other one, this one. Share it with others so that they too may receive the help that they need. And so, yeah, if you could do this, it would help us to spread the word. We would really appreciate it.
It honestly would help everybody else, right? So this is really about getting the word out, informing people about mold toxicity, what CIRS is, how it relates to Lyme, and the importance of understanding it so that you have the ability to reclaim your health and you have the ability to help your family do that. We also talked about just kind of how my week went, and I'm going to give a short abbreviation because it totally fits into what we're talking about today, which is the remediation process. There's lots of ways to do it, and as we dive further into it, I'm sure we'll explain more, but the short version is I had to get my personal belongings cleaned and taken care of so that they could remain in my home without reinfecting me. So we have been in a hotel. We meaning my family and I are really kind of tired, which is probably why the camera was still going, even though I didn't know it was going. Like, people beware, the camera's always going. But it's important to know that even as you're going through this process and as overwhelming as it can be, you can find humor, and humor is a really great thing, and you can get well, and there's always a way around it, even when it doesn't feel like there is. So stick with us and hopefully we'll give you some great resources. We also wanted to share that we'll be sharing a free giveaway. So be sure to stay tuned through the rest of the Facebook Live. This is going to help you in your journey. Both Deanna and I have something that we want to give to our viewers that will help you along.
Absolutely. Yeah. And excuse me, all that laughing, and I'm having to do a lot of throat clearing. But Heather and I just really want to help you and your family find true healing from the inside out. We're going to be exploring lots of ways to find health and hoping that perhaps for some of you, you may learn a new perspective on what being truly healthy means and what it looks like. And we just want to remind you that we are not doctors. We're not here to diagnose. We're just here to empower you with information and to encourage you to seek medical advice if something we say tonight resonates with you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for joining us in our episode 3 of Reclaiming Your Health. Well, Deanna, let's see if we can get through it without any technical difficulties. So we've got a lot of information to share with you guys today. So you want to get started?
Absolutely. Yeah. Last week, we talked a little bit about how to test your home and find out, whether that's safe or other buildings. We shared a little bit about mold inspectors. And so we want to share a little bit more today. We shared last week that there are some mold inspectors out there who know enough to be dangerous, and there are others who are extremely qualified to help you. We talked last week about some of the qualifications that you might look for in somebody, and then we just want to talk about like maybe some questions that you could ask a mold inspector if you're talking with them.
Absolutely.
Or home inspector. I should say home inspector, or, you know, environmental specialist. They can go by different names. But one of the things you want to find out is, do they know what mycotoxins are? Mycotoxins are the toxins given off by toxic mold, right? And so they are what actually makes us sick. And so a mold inspector should know for sure what mycotoxins are. Do they work with people who have CIRS or Lyme disease? So chronic, I always want to say chronic immune response syndrome for some reason, because it is immune related, but it's chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And so do they work with people who have those illnesses, and are they familiar with them? Those are two extremely important things to know. And I think I was sharing that, you know, we had talked with some home inspectors who, without, you know, even testing, this was before we even knew about CIRS, we had some mold in our attic that we wanted to remediate. And they were like, oh, everybody has mold like this in your attic. If somebody is blowing you off like that, that's definitely a reason to give pause and look for somebody else.
Yeah, nobody should be having toxic mold in their attic or anywhere else in the house. So if they're telling you it's normal, they're crazy.
Right. Whether you have the gene for mold susceptibility or not, there should not be mold in your home or anywhere else that you are spending a lot of time. Definitely. Or really any time. I mean, there shouldn't be mold anywhere inside. Too often it's allowed to just slide. And, you know, the mold inspectors saying that it's true. You go places and a lot of times people just don't think anything of it, that it's, you know, well, everybody has some of that. It's not something that should be present in your environment.
No, and I just want to reiterate it. We talked about it last week too, but this could also mean your workplace. Yeah. It could mean a gym or a church or a car or any place that you frequent on a regular basis. So even though we're talking about it from the frame of mind of home, please know that we're actually talking about any place that you could be potentially spending any length of time in.
Yeah. Yep. Or, you know, or your children, so a school too. So another thing is to ask, do they know what the ERMI is, the Environmental Relative Moldiness Index? Do they know what that is? It uses qPCR, which is qualitative polymerase chain reaction technology, to assess mold spores that are collected in dust in the building that you're testing. So do they know what an ERMI is, or qPCR technology? And do they know about the HurtsMe2, which is the scoring panel to assess the safety of a home for somebody with CIRS? Another important question. Additionally, you want them to be thinking very broadly. So we don't want them necessarily just looking for mold. It may be some other toxins in your home. So we really kind of want them thinking broadly and thinking about VOCs and other possible toxicities within your home. And if the person that you're talking to has no idea what you're talking about, you know, about any of these questions, they're definitely not your people. You need to keep searching. And we mentioned a website last week that you could go to. I think it's acac.org, if I'm remembering correctly, where you can search for people in your area with certain qualifications. And that's a great place to start. You may or may not find somebody who's qualified without all of those qualifications, but it's a great place to get started.
Absolutely. And I, before I started making a fool out of myself, while I was hoping to reconnect with you, I started to tell people what different molds look like. They don't always look like our typical molds that we see. So if you think of black mold, you're thinking the mold is black. But one of the most dangerous one is Aspergillus penicillium, and it actually kind of looks like a fuzz, kind of a white dust looking thing. So do keep that in mind, especially if you see anything that looks like water damage or have water damage or poor ventilation, and you see something that doesn't look normal. It very easily could be mold, and it doesn't have to look like typical mold to be mold. So
absolutely. I think the other thing is, if you are in a building, a home, or if you're like looking for a new home, an apartment, a home to buy, whatever it is, look for signs of water damage. If you see brown rings on the ceiling or on a wall somewhere, that's a very clear sign of water damage. Look in places where there's likely to be water. So we recently sold our home and needed to look for temporary housing. When I was checking out a few apartments, I was going in and pulling the doors open under the kitchen sink to see if there had been leakage under there, under bathroom sinks, places where you can see a little bit more clearly if there's been water damage. Always checking ceilings for brown stains, looking around showers, things like that.
Yes, and part of what we did too, because we had to move into an apartment as well as we actually asked the landlord for the maintenance records for that particular apartment. What has been done? Do they have any record of a leaking toilet, leaking dishwasher, leaking, water filtration system on the fridge? Any of those should be red flags and something to pay attention to. So
yeah, similarly, Heather, when we have traveled and needed to stay in a hotel for any length of time, I'll ask those same questions. Like, do you have a room that has not been affected by water damage or in the vicinity of one that has? Those are some of the questions that I'm asking to protect myself if I'm traveling as well, which is important.
Definitely.
So
I want to ask your mold inspector too is, who's their biggest resource? Who's their referral source? If it's coming from a naturopath, that's actually a really good thing because chances are this naturopath may know something about CIRS. I think that's really important. And check with your doctor specifically to see if they have a source of inspectors. So if you're working with somebody that's helping you through this process of mold, ask them. They're going to be your greatest advocate, and they're certainly going to have a feel for who may or may not be able to get the job done. You also might have to do a lot of research and legwork yourself, because the difference between me being just outside of Seattle versus Deanna being in Vermont, there's a huge difference. And so, Deanna, why don't you share with people kind of what you had to go through, because it's been obviously a very different experience than I've had for sure.
Yeah. So as I shared in one of our previous episodes, when I first started this journey, I didn't have any shoemaker certified doctors in my area. That was really kind of out of reach for me at the time. And so I really worked through this process with my naturopath, who had never even heard of the condition. So I was bringing research to her. We were working through the process together. And since that time, more and more resources are popping up all of the time, which is so excellent. But so at the time, I was really having to, figure out how to get some more information about whether my home environment could be impacting me. And so in order to do that, I ended up having to consult with people remotely. So I was doing phone consultations and kind of doing the testing work myself. So there were a few people that I spoke with along the way. And one of them actually was on Chris Kresser's podcast. We shared his podcast link. We talked about him last week, and we have his podcast link. If you guys want that list of resources, we can still get that to you. So feel free to email either one of us or through our websites. But so he did a podcast episode with somebody who I did a consultation with, and he was actually the one who shared a bunch of that information about going to acac.org and looking for the specific qualifications. He was very helpful. Out of all the people that we spoke with, I found was the most helpful to us.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about aca.org. Deanna's going to give us some more information about that. And again, if any of this information strikes a chord with you, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We want to be able to give you some resources to be able to check things. The other thing you want to do is, what kind of testing do they do? Are they only doing air testing? So air quality testing can be super, super helpful, like we mentioned last week. But if the mold is not currently sporing, it doesn't do you any good. If the only form of testing they do is air quality testing, that's a huge red flag, and you should run the other direction for sure. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about the ACA.org, Deanna, and then we can be sure to add that to our resources as well.
Yeah, so I was thinking that we had talked about this last week, and maybe now I'm just recalling our preparation for this. So, so The ACAC.org stands for the American Council for Accredited Certification. And so it was actually, so I'll just say his name. It was Mike Schwartz, who was on Chris Kresser's podcast. And I don't remember his specific website, but it could be determined through that resource or through that podcast, and we could add it to our resource list as well. I know he's spoken at several of the Surviving Mold conferences as well, and he's well trusted in this community.
And I think he's on a few different podcasts as well, so I'm sure you can Google his name. Yeah,
right, exactly. So some of the accreditations or certifications that Mike suggested that you look for are CCIEC, which is Council Certified Indoor Environmental Consultant, a CMI, a Council Certified Microbial Inspector, or a CMC, Council Microbial Consultant. Council Certified Microbial Consultant. And so these are just certifications that you can look for that might make somebody more qualified to deal with your situation. Again, I would still be sure to ask them all of the questions because you never know. You don't want to just go on their accreditation. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily up on all of this stuff. But when you go to that website, you can type in your zip code and it should bring up several people. And then, like I said, you can look for people with these certifications. I know when I did that, I did find one person in my area, and this was sort of late in our process, so we didn't end up using him, but I did find somebody. And now there is a shoemaker certified doctor in my area, and she told me that she uses this guy. And he's really one of the very few people on that list that has those certifications. So it meshes with the information that he was, sharing, that they're going to be a little bit more qualified probably to deal with your situation.
And the truth is, too, is if you're either in my area or if you're in Deanna's area, be sure to reach out to us personally. We're happy to share with you who we've used. I hate to just pop information over, the internet without their approval. So at least you can come to us directly and we'd be happy to share with you our resources of who we had. So now we're going to kind of talk about how did we react to testing? How did it affect our ability to move forward? And this is still really fresh in my brain because I'm literally still going through the process this week as we speak. And I know that once I got the diagnosis of having CIRS and I attempted to get well doing protocols to help with CIRS and I wasn't making headway, I knew that I needed to inspect my home. And it scared me to death because the way that I had it set up is not only did I have my home, but I also had my business attached. So we lived in a townhome. And if you walk through our garage, you could walk into my office, which was super convenient. And it also had a street entry. So I had a storefront and I had my home. So it wasn't just my home, it was also my business. And I had a small little wellness community, a wellness clinic. So this also affected 3 other people's businesses. And I knew that if I found out that I had mold, I was either going to have to find a way to rectify it, or we were going to have to move. And it just didn't affect my family anymore. It affected my business and 3 other people's businesses. So for me, it was a loaded gun and it caused me great anxiety. So went ahead and ripped the Band-Aid off and got the testing done. And sure enough, we came back with mold on our property. And because we were renting, I was under the thought process that, they'll take care of us and they'll take care of this mold. And without going too far into that story, the truth is 6 months later, they didn't do anything. They were in denial. They had one of their mold inspectors that did not fill the criteria that you and I just talked about. And their mold inspector was a complete joke. All he really did was air samples. And they were trying to pin that we didn't have mold at all, that it was all just a figment of our imagination. But looking back now, they're just trying, it's called CYA, cover your behind, so to speak. Because if they would have admitted to having mold, that could have opened a whole nother can of worms. So I started the testing process in January, and we moved out June 1st because it became very evidently clear that they were not going to take care of us. And again, people, we were paying nearly $3,000 a month rent. This was not the slumlords. So it caused a tremendous amount of anxiety. And ultimately, not only did we have to move our home, but we had to relocate my business and 3 other people's businesses. But in the end, I'm so incredibly grateful. I landed in a place that's even better than I was before. And I found a place for all of my practitioners to be. And it just works out. So even when it feels like it's going to be the end of the world, sometimes things work out better than you could possibly imagine. It's just taking those initial steps. And I'm so grateful I did. And I'm so incredibly grateful that I landed where I am with my home and with my business. So,
yeah, Heather, I really think that that perspective, that attitude is one that we cannot stress enough, that this illness and everything that comes with it can be so overwhelming. But when you approach it with that attitude and with that perspective, it can make a world of difference. And to actually see, and I know this may seem ridiculous to somebody who's listening, but being at this point in my journey, at the beginning, I may not have been able to get to this point either. In fact, I know I wasn't at this point. But when I was able to shift my perspective to recognizing this illness as a gift and to actually embrace it versus push it away, was where my real healing started. And I know that we will probably do a whole episode on mindset at some point, not just for CIRS, but anybody with chronic illness. But I can't tell you enough how much that perspective is helping your situation, both then and now.
Well, definitely, because if I would have stayed in the mindset that I could not do business or could not live anywhere else, or everybody else's businesses was going to collapse because I had mold, I would still be there. I'd be sicker than I am now. I could potentially be exposing them. I mean, there wasn't a good scenario with that other than getting out, but it's pushing past the fear and dealing with the discomfort that comes along with the unknown. And if you can embrace that gracefully, things do have a way of unfolding, and sometimes better than we expect.
Yes, definitely. And we're going to share a little bit more about that in a little bit. Yeah. So my story I want to share real quick is that we weren't really sure the source of my exposure and whether it was a current event or a recent event or some exposure from the past. It was pretty unclear. And we knew we had the mold in our attic, but we had remediated that, and we weren't sure if there were mycotoxins left over from that. So we did extensive cleaning. But what happened was I was improving in my home. And so we were feeling like it is probably not an issue here. But I also wasn't quite making the improvements that we expected. And so I also had the diagnosis of Lyme that came about in the process. And so it was hard to determine, is what's going on a result of the Lyme, or is it still that I am still getting, mold exposure somewhere? And so what we ended up doing was using my body as the test versus trying to figure out if it was something more in the home, because what we were finding there was kind of showing us that it shouldn't be, like it wasn't, but were we missing something? We weren't sure. So like I said, we tested my body, and we did a couple of things that are a little advanced. They're not necessarily mentioned in the Shoemaker protocol, but they are things that some of the Shoemaker practitioners will use. And so one of those was we did a C4A challenge. So that was one of the biomarkers that we talked about last week that can be measured. And what we did was took a baseline C4A, and I had been on binders to remove the mold from my body. This was kind of, further along in my process. And then I stayed at home without going other places as much as possible for a period of time. And during that time, stopped taking my binders, and then did a repeat C4A test so that we could see what happened in that period of time. Did my C4A go up, which would have been a pretty clear sign that I was being exposed in my home since I was avoiding other exposures during that period of time. And that came back negative. So it was a great sign at that point that there was nothing present going on in my home affecting me. And then we did another test too, a little later in the game, but another part of the treatment process is to use something called VIP, vasoactive intestinal polypeptide. And so I started using the VIP, and then what we did was I went for a test of my TGF beta 1, another biomarker that we mentioned last week. I know these are big words.
Things easy. They have to make them as complicated and wordy as possible.
Yes. But, you know, this test was really pretty clear and helpful. So I went for a fasted TGF beta 1 early one morning, went back to my car, took a dose of the VIP, and within 15 minutes went back in for a repeat test of the TGF beta 1. And what should have happened if I was having current mold exposure was that TGF beta 1 would rise, and it didn't at all. So another very, very clear indication that what was going on with me was not a current exposure. So it was more clear indication that my home was safe for me. And so sometimes the testing can go beyond your actual physical environment and use your body. And
yes,
because we're also individual, I actually think that kind of testing can be really helpful, because it really indicates how your specific body is doing with your environment. Because you could also have a very clean home that might be clean in terms of moldiness, that for all, anybody could be really great, but you may be so sensitive that even a tiny amount of mycotoxins or something in that home could be affecting you. So I actually really love that idea of using your own body as a test for how your environment is affecting you.
And that's ultimately what we had to do. The fact that I wasn't getting better from treatments that should have taken care of my sinuses and everything else was a pure indicator that there was mold in my environment. And my first place to check was my home, because it was also my intuition and my gut feeling. So we have to tap into those things as well. I know I was talking to my naturopath, and she was talking about how moldy her car was, right? Because she was a snowboarder, and she always had her snowboard in her car, and then all the snow would melt in her car. And then, so, we have to kind of think outside of the box, and we also have to trust our intuition, because it will generally lead us in the right direction.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what holds people back from getting tested, or what concerns they might have about, they're hearing this information and feeling unsure about whether they should move forward with testing.
I actually think fear is probably the biggest thing. I know it was the biggest thing for me, because fear equals, oh crap, now what?
100%.
It's hard you can't unknow once you know. So once I knew that I had mold in my apartment, I didn't have a choice. I had to move forward. So for a lot of people, just stepping forward to do the testing, it's because what if happens if I do test positive for mold, or my environment or my job or whatever else tests positive. So it's also the financial impact. How much money is it going to cost you? It's a big part of why we're trying to give you some resources and different ideas of what testing can look like, because it can look a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to look traditional. And if you're working with a doctor that's familiar with CIRS or biotoxin illness, they will have different ways that they can help you, and they'll certainly look at the financial aspect too. There's actually some home testing kits that you can do. And I think we touched on those last week. So there is some home mold testing that you can do yourself. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to fear. It's just scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And we used home testing kits. We used the ERMI. So we just did the collection ourselves. You can have somebody collect for you. And that's great, because then they can combine it with some of the other testing that you're doing. Because at the time, we really didn't feel like we had anybody that we could call upon in the area, or it wasn't really clear to us who was available for that. We did it ourselves with the guidance of, somebody that we were consulting with remotely, but we were doing it ourselves. Sure. So, yeah, I think, the other fear that can come up, Heather, is fear of others not supporting you through the process. And, it's really scary if you have, family, friends, or, even more so your spouse who may be struggling with what's going to happen, the what if, right? So even if you're on board, they may be struggling with that what if stuff. Like, family may be thinking like, what if we don't see you again? What if you can't come into our home? What if our home is unsafe for you? Feeling like their home isn't good enough for you. I think that it's a really sensitive thing to feel like, well, you can't come in because it's not clean enough or it's not good enough for you. And it's really not the issue. But I think that definitely comes up and can be, out of fear. They're afraid of supporting you in this process because they're just not sure what that's going to mean for them. And then, like your partner or your spouse or your children may have this fear of having to move or to downsize or to minimize, all things that could be very possible. But as Heather said, we both have been in a situation where we've had to really minimize and to make really big shifts in our life because of this. And neither one of us would go back and undo any of it because of the beneficial impact that it has had on us. So yeah, I think it's important to share that there is this fear coming from other people as well. And that may be why you're seeing that others are having a hard time supporting you. And sometimes it's helpful if we can just address that.
Definitely, for sure. And 4 years ago, I was in 2,400 square feet. Today, I'm a family of 3 with 2 dogs living in less than 1,000 square feet. And I would move into a tiny house if I had to. Doesn't even faze me. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I own if I don't have my health.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, it just doesn't matter anymore. And I think that's a perspective change just through this whole journey and this whole process. It's like, I have this beautiful daughter and I want her to be healthy and I want me to be able to be around, to be present with her. So if that means I have to live in a smaller house and have less stuff because I know it's safe and she's safe, then I don't care. It just doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, I have really actually realized how much I enjoy the process of living with less stuff. It's freeing actually. And it has been kind of therapeutic in a way. I think, it's hard. It's definitely hard at first because it's such a shift, and all change I think is hard. But through the process, I've really begun to realize that it's a blessing to be able to recognize like what we don't really need. There's so much stuff that we have that we really don't need.
No kidding. And, a part of what we're talking about too, when it comes to the fear, is the financial commitment, because moving, whether you're renting or owning a home, isn't cheap. And, like we just talked about, I would do it again in a heartbeat, because at the end of the day, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. You have nothing. So, and there's lots of different ways that we're not going to go into too many details about what it means about cross-contaminating, not contaminating. If you're starting to do research about CIRS or people with CIRS, you'll hear a lot about people living more minimalistically. And I think it's really a personal choice, and it's really about your emotional well-being, right? It's if I know I have less stuff and for some reason my stuff is making me sick, it's going to make it easier for me to let go of. And so it has less of an emotional impact in the end. And I also think through the lens of CIRS or Lyme or any of this, your perspective does change as far as what's important. So I think there's a lot of fear around that, just the financial commitment. And when we moved, we actually kept our belongings and used a process that uses a special enzyme. But some people will choose to let go of their belongings, for sure. So, and the truth is too, is that just because Deanna has CIRS and I have CIRS does not necessarily mean that we're going to be in reaction in the same way. there might be some people that are more sensitive and some people that are less sensitive. There might be some people that can handle cross-contamination, and there might be some people that can't. So we can't paint a picture of what it looks like for everybody because it is such an individual process. We are all bio-individuals. We have different genetic makeups. We have different emotional environments, physical environments. The outdoors around us look very different here in the Northwest than they do in Vermont. Everything is completely different. So it's really situational. So even though we're sharing the information about our stories, please keep in mind that we are all different, and don't think because of what we've had to do that that's going to be your reality.
Right? Yeah, and I think exactly in line with what I was saying about testing and using your body as a judge versus maybe your environment. You know, I think if there are visible, obvious things and testing is coming back as really obvious issues, you know, that's pretty solid information for you. But if there's any question, I think testing your body and using all your signs and symptoms is going to be your best judge, because we are all so individual. Some people may be more sensitive than others, while others have a higher tolerance. It totally depends on the full picture. So
absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to share that I created a document that was really helpful to me in sharing with other people what I was going through. So I just shared a little bit of information in that document about what CIRS was and how it affected me. And I just shared, you know, what that meant for me and the way that I was needing to live. And so I had that document available to be able to share with others if they had questions. And it was really helpful to me in that I knew if somebody was asking me questions, I had this really easy way to tell them, because it's a lot of information to share. And especially when you have a moldy brain and you're put on the spot, it can be really hard to know like exactly what to share without making it too complicated. And so taking the time to really put it into words and in a document to be able to share with somebody was really helpful to me. It sort of gave me some peace about it. And I actually created a Facebook group and invited my friends and family to come to that group. And I shared a little bit of information there throughout my journey. So, you know, if you're kind of wondering how to share with people, that might be one way to think about doing it.
I think it's a great idea, because not only are you getting all the facts and information on paper, but you're not having to tell the story over and over again, because people are curious. CIRS is something that people don't know about, and they're learning about it, and they want to. The people that care and are thoughtful in your life want to know more about it. So to be able to just send a Word document instead of constantly repeating yourself, and making sure that you provide them with all the facts they need to know, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
All
right. Well, we want to close things up tonight, but we wanted to remind you that we're doing this video series so that you have some actual resources to share with your family to make it easier for you. So like I used that Word document, we want you to be able to share some of these resources with your friends and family, and so that they don't think you're crazy and you don't feel alone in the process, or they don't feel alone. We want to, again, be sure to share with you a message of hope. We know, again, that so much of this information can feel really overwhelming, but we promise you that your health is 1,000% worth it. As we have said tonight a couple of times, you won't regret the changes that you make. What do you have if you don't have your health, really? So we also want you to join us next week, because we're going to talk further about the difference between someone who has the active gene for mold susceptibility and someone without that gene, as well as the first couple of steps in getting better.
Absolutely. And we were talking about that free gift. Be sure and check out Essential Wellness NW Northwest for Northwest, and pick up your free shopper's guide. It's a guide to help you navigate the grocery store and finding good, healthy foods. And be sure to check out Deanna's at thrivingdeanna.com, thrivingwithdeanna.com. It's a free snack guide. Oh my gosh, that's such a moldy brain moment, just in case you want to know what that looked like. it was that. Not only that, but I'm thinking about the first live broadcast that we had today and what an ass I made out of myself. So on that note, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for episode 3. I'm Heather Halliday with Essential Wellness Northwest, coming to you live from Redmond, Washington, where true healing is happening as we speak.
And I am Deanna Wilcox of Thriving with Deanna, certified health coach from Vermont, just wanting to share hope and real health with you guys. Vibrant health. We want that for you so much. Thank you so much for being here again. Don't forget to like and share so that we can get this word out and help others. We know that you want to help us with that, so please do so.
Thank you so much. And on that note, I'm going to go detox my body at Urban Soul in a hot sauna. So I'll catch you all next week for episode 4. Have a great night. And thanks so much, Deanna.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.